Good afternoon and welcome to the EVGEN Pharma PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll. I would now like to hand you over to Hugh Jones, CEO. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon and hello everybody. Welcome to our investor meet, the second one we've done. We're here in the City of London, having announced two very important pieces of news, one of them transformative this week. Here with me is Richard Molson, our Chief Financial Officer, who we've met before, and for the first time our Chief Business Officer, Dr. Helen Coleman, who the three of us did the deal that we announced earlier on in the week. Now, we're a public company. So on the next slide, you'll see the standard disclaimer. And then on the slide that follows, I'll summarize who we are. So Hugh Jones, Richard Molson, Helen Coleman, representing EVGEN. We're clinical stage drug development. We're focusing on breast cancer, glioma, and other cancers as internal projects. And we've got three molecular targets of interest, and there they are on the screen. It's a brand new class of pharmaceuticals based on an ingredient that originated in nature but is now fully synthetic in our hands. It's a synthetic drug called sulforaphane. And as you've seen this week, there are applications in a lot of therapeutic areas based on this network target engagement that sulforaphane has, released by our proprietary mechanism in SFX01. There's a ton of preclinical and clinical data on sulforaphane in the public domain, and one of those will become clear as a de-risker for the Stalicla deal we announced on Monday. So we have the platform that stabilizes it. We can deliver reliable amounts of sulforaphane into the body, and we'll be reiterating that in the healthy volunteer study that starts this week. We've got IP over this whole portfolio of uses and indeed the mechanism of release. And sitting opposite you on this table is probably 70 or 80 years worth of experience in pharma, biotech, and finance. So what we do and what we proved we could do this week is to establish proof of concept wherever that's necessary and partner our assets to create shareholder value. And we've got, we believe, a lot of value inflection points. Richard can comment on our cash position as of the last reporting period.
Yeah, so we had 9 million at the end of March. Obviously, there'll be an update when we do the interim results in December. But I'll be giving you where the runway we think now is towards the back end of this presentation. So I will guide you on cash position later.
And the next slide, Richard, please.
So this is the principal financial terms of the transaction. We are extremely happy with these numbers, and got to bear in mind this is just one area of medicine that we've licensed. So we're still able to license our SFX01 in all of the other various areas we're looking at, such as cancer and inflammation. So we expect to have had $6 million in fees by the end of next year. And in total, there will be $26.5 million that would be paid to us if we get to the point where we are ready for commercial launch. Over and above that, there are substantial milestones from hitting certain sales targets, and those run in parallel with royalties that we would also receive. The royalties are, as a minimum, double digit, and in some scenarios they are well over double digits. So this is a fairly rich deal for us, given that we have no clinical data for ASD. As you'll all be aware, this is the initial indication, which is going to be developed by Stalicla. All of the costs, apart from some early supplies of product, will be borne by them, and that is what triggers. It's that indication which we get the milestone payments for.
Thanks. I thought we'd give you a little bit of background on autism spectrum disorder, actually, and why we think this deal not only is quite rich for us, as Richard said, but is double de-risked. Helen, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think when we were considering this deal, firstly, I wanted to reassure us and our board that there was a good commercial opportunity in ASD, and also in terms of an indication that we had considered and not prioritised ourselves, what was the additional value that was Stalicla bringing to the table that would enable us to have a de-risked clinical development programme and have a better chance of getting commercialisation of SFX01 in ASD. So briefly, there's no currently approved treatments for ASD as a disorder. However, there are some off-label uses and a couple of products that are labelled for specific behavioural features of ASD. However, these products do have also significant downsides to them in terms of side effects such as weight gain and sedation. It is a growing disorder, with a growing diagnosis, so the prevalence here in the US is 1.7 million. And the US is the priority market, and that's where Stalicla are aiming to conduct their initial clinical development work. The market for ASD is growing almost exponentially, and that's based on really a growing understanding of the disorder itself and of the diagnosis of it and the acceptance of the therapeutic interventions in some cases. And that's really supported by the FDA enabling some fast-track designations for therapeutic development programs, which we would hope Stalicla may be able to take advantage of. So why Stalicla? Well, you know, sulforaphane itself has had some encouraging evidence in ASD already, but when we looked at it, we found it would be a challenging development situation for us because of the heterogeneity in the patient population. So these individuals have a variety of behavioural challenges, and they are from sort of mild to severe. And they probably, in effect, are groups of disorders rather than one whole disorder. And when you go forward with a clinical development plan with such a patient population, if you don't have anything to identify patient responder populations, you really have to cast the net very wide and have very large-scale clinical trials to get an efficacy readout. So what Stalicla are leading on really is the identification of patient phenotypes within the whole ASD spectrum, and grouping these patients and understanding some of the underlying neurobiology, and being able to match potential therapeutic interventions that are more likely to have beneficial effects in these patient populations. And they have identified SFX01 as being a great match for a group of patients which they're calling phenotype 2. Obviously, we've done a fair amount of diligence on them and their technology, and vice versa, them on us. And we really have good confidence that they have de-risked their technology, and they've done some clinical trials in different patient populations for ASD and have had positive outcomes, that they will be able to deliver a good structured development program for SFX01. So really, this reduces our clinical development risks, so it makes ASD a go for us. And it should make the program actually be able to be developed more efficiently and bring therapeutic options to market quicker. And I'd just like to add, you know, there are some concerns within the patient population, the carers of the patients, around some of the therapeutic options currently available and how they might have long-lasting impacts as these patients grow. And SFX01 is really unique in the fact that we have proved its safety and its benign nature, if you like. So it should provide a really interesting therapeutic option for some of these patients.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Richard. So summarising, I think, the last two slides, we think that the likelihood of, you know, milestones of $160.5 million being delivered is very high because we're double de-risked. I'll use that term again. We're de-risked in the sense that sulforaphane has already shown itself to be effective in one clinical trial and some of the smaller ones in people with autism spectrum disorder. The trick is to pick the responders, and that's the second element of de-risking. Stalicla is pretty much the only company we could do this deal with because of their unique and proprietary technology to spot the people who are going to respond to SFX01. So the likelihood of these milestone payments delivering to the company, we think, is pretty high, very high indeed, actually. So we'll just move on to the next slide now, and I'll cover a bit about the news that we issued this morning, because we've heard that our healthy volunteer study is open for recruitment. We've got 10 slots, of which 6 are already filled, starting tomorrow. So it's much more than a standard pharmacokinetic study. It's a pharmacokinetic pharmacodynamic study, and that means that we will assess how our new enteric-coated tablet gets handled by the body, what the metabolite picture is, and also we will be measuring how sulforaphane released from SFX01 interacts with molecular targets in cells extracted from our volunteers. We're open for recruitment, we're on schedule, and we will, by the first half of next year, learn even more about sulforaphane, and our partner Stalicla will be equally interested in these data. Moving forward then to glioblastoma, fatal brain cancer, as you know, with a 5% 5-year survival rate. We've received scientific advice from the Netherlands Scientific Advice Body, the regulatory authority there, and it's positive and supportive. The advice we've got from the global community of brain cancer treaters is do a small one first, do an investigator-sponsored study to establish how SFX01 and the sulforaphane released by it interact with the brain tumour. And that's precisely what we're doing with the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. So it's funded, external to the company. We will be providing drug, of course, and supervision and all our technical expertise. But the cash runway effect is quite profound. Even before any Stalicla payments, we've now got a cash runway, as Richard will elaborate a bit more on, but well past Q4 2024.
Yeah. So because effectively some of the cost of our clinical GBM program will be funded by the university or grants that it obtains, we are able to extend the guidance we've been given about cash runway, which previously was to the end of 2023. If you take the investigator-led study and the first milestone we will have received shortly for signing the deal, we're now funded through to the end of 2024, so that's another 12 months runway. If we then assume that we're going to have received the full 6 million of milestones that we'd expect to have got around, well, certainly by mid-2024, then we are well funded into 2025. How much further we go beyond then is a function of how we choose to allocate those milestones. They're not needed other than to increase the scale of the GBM clinical program if we think that's justified by the data from the investigator study. Or potentially we're always looking for opportunities to expand our pipeline, perhaps extend the molecules that we develop. So it's possible that if we have the right opportunity there, then we would allocate some of that 6 million to developing that and effectively broadening our base and our risk profile.
Very good.
Next slide.
Yeah, next slide. I think this is the last meaty slide. This is an update on our pipeline chart, which is freely available on our website now. Breast cancer, an important indication for us. We're still beavering away with the University of Manchester, the Manchester Breast Centre, in really positioning SFX01 carefully in the increasingly complex world of the treatment of metastatic breast cancer, particularly when this new class of drugs, the CDK4/6 inhibitors, have started to wane in their effect, as inevitably these first and second line drugs do. So that collaboration is underway. We'd like to do a very large study in breast cancer once that's finished, but currently it's beyond our financial means because it would be a massive undertaking. We are looking for partners though, and partnering as ever is an ongoing thing in any biotech company. We've added neurodevelopmental disorders to our pipeline under Stalicla, and just to remind you that at the end of this healthy volunteer study, Stalicla will be doing a phase 2 study at their own cost entirely. So that's an externally funded program in, I'll say it again, a double de-risked indication. The glioblastoma, I think we've covered, with the next step being the investigator-sponsored study with the Erasmus under the careful eye of the Netherlands regulatory authorities. And we still have some preclinical work in hematological malignancies, and we still have the rights from various Spanish institutions for analogues of sulforaphane that we're still testing on. So that completes, I think, with the last slide, the formal part of our presentation. We've got some pre-submitted questions, so I'll hand over to our hosts, Investor Meet now, and then we'll start taking questions. Please type them as they occur to you. Thank you.
Hugh, Richard and Helen, thank you very much for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. While the company takes a few moments to review those questions submitted today, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Guys, we received a number of pre-submitted questions today, as well as additional questions from the session. I would like at this juncture to hand back to you to run through these where it's applicable for you to do so. Over to you guys.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions here pre-submitted about whether the board is buying stock or not. So let's just deal with that one at the start and put everybody's minds hopefully at rest. Richard, do you want to do the formal bit on this one?
Yeah, look, as you'll be aware, the share price got down to below 3p the past few months. It's been a difficult market for life sciences as well as the market generally. I have to say that was a very tempting price at which to buy stock. We weren't allowed to. The legal advice was very clear. Whilst we were negotiating the Stalicla deal, and that has been going on for many months now, we were seen as inside, and we were strictly prohibited from buying stock. And equally, we haven't been able to grant any share options for the last 9 months, and that we would have done by now if we hadn't been subject to that restriction. In the future, whether or not we buy stock will be dictated as much as anything else simply by what inside knowledge we have and the extent to which that would be insider dealing if we were to buy shares.
Thanks, Richard. I'll say what I said in July. I'd dearly love to in July, and I would dearly love to now, but I still can't. I think the pertinent question here is, does your management deliver shareholder value? Does your management show that it's capable of designing really elegant, low-risk clinical development programs, and can your management monetize the asset, that is, do big deals with it? And I think hopefully the announcements up until and including this morning prove to you to some degree that your management can design elegant development programs and monetize the asset in a $165 million, milestone only, $165.5 million deal. Hopefully that answers the question, but if there's anything unanswered in that piece you've just heard, please pop one into the Investor Meet platform. So there's a request here to give us an update on breast cancer, and I think I covered it in the pipeline chart, but just to reiterate, we're actively engaged with the Manchester Breast Centre on preclinical work in CDK4/6 resistant patients. And again, we're doing a meticulous job of designing the next experiment that needs to be done to de-risk a clinical study of SFX01. In parallel, of course, we're looking for partners for the breast cancer program. And I can tell you that we have got some preliminary data, we've announced it previously, that shows there's good potential for SFX01 in the post-CDK4/6 setting, as it's called, when these ladies with metastatic breast cancer have been on these drugs for a little while and they start to wane in their effectiveness. That's the breast cancer update, but please pop another question as ever in if you want more. So the Stalicla partnership, there's one about our ambitions here. Well, look, we're getting on very well with our new partner. There was a great meeting of minds between the two companies when we clocked that this is a de-risked clinical program because of historical data on sulforaphane, coupled with their proprietary technology, which helps us spot the large group of subjects, people with ASD, who are likely to respond to SFX01. So it is a big opportunity for us relative to our market cap today. Double-digit royalties on top of the 160.5 million of milestones through the lifetime of the deal. So I call it transformative. I've said that internally to my colleagues, and I'll say it now. We think it's a transformative deal for us. It gives us a very substantial cash runway, even by the standards of biotech companies. It's longer, much longer than most. So we think it's a transformative transaction that we've completed this week. I've got another question in here about, does the board feel vulnerable to a takeover, Richard?
Well, clearly it's something that we think about a lot, because we as a management team would still regard our share price as being good value in the light of a Stalicla deal. That said, it's very rare for hostile bids to be made for biotech companies when they don't have a product either on the market or close to registration, and we don't at this stage. So it seems unlikely, pretty unlikely actually, but we would be on the receiving end of a hostile takeover. If we were approached and we were offered a price that we felt reflected fully the value of the business, then of course we would engage with that buyer. But I can tell you now, we're not in those discussions, just in case anyone is wondering.
Yeah, just to reiterate, there are no approaches currently as of now. So a quick question on the healthy volunteer study coming in. So when are the results expected and how large is the study? So the first part of that question, the latest for that study being reported is the end of the first half of next year. It's an adaptive design, which means you can change with the agreement of the regulatory authorities, pre-agreed. You can change the structure and dosing and other parameters of the study during the study itself. The first slot is going to be about 28 subjects, but that can be more depending on what we find and where else we want to go. So it's a very elegant design by our Chief Medical Officer, Glenn Clack, and the current number looks like it's under 30 subjects, of which the first half dozen or so are being screened this week. Okay, how long have we and Stalicla been, it says trialing together, but have been working on the relationship, I assume. You want to cover that one, Helen?
Sure. So just to give a bit of context, when I joined EVGEN last year, one of the first emails I had in my inbox was a list of approaches that we'd had. And I have to say, we mainly get approaches from academics wanting to use the drug in their studies. But one of those approaches was from a company I've never heard of before called Stalicla. And we arranged a meeting to have an initial chat. So the initial chat with them was last year, but as any relationship, you get to know one another and you sort of build those relationships. And I'd say we got to properly negotiating in January of this year.
So, like all biotech deals, these things take months, many months to consummate, with the detail that's required of us looking at their technology, them looking at us, and then the hard-nosed commercial discussions, which, in fairness to Helen, she did rather well in this particular deal. So are we hopeful of more deals in the short term? Well, we're always hopeful. We're a biotech company. You have to be an optimist to work in biotech, and sometimes that optimism, just like this week, pays out. So I think BD is more or less constant activity, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So ever since I joined, my major focus is about building new relationships for EVGEN, introducing the company, its assets, and the opportunities for partnership. And as Hugh mentioned, it's an ongoing process. Now the travel restrictions have been lifted. I'm able to get to a lot more partnering conferences in person, and that is a more effective way of building those initial relationships. And we always have conversations on the go, but we, as any other relationship, you have your ups and downs. But part of it is creating that network so that when we get a interesting data output, we can go back to those parties that have interest in our area and we can reconnect with them and then try and engage properly on future collaboration. And that's what we do. So we're about the creation of data sets to enable the partnering and completing valuable deals for the company.
Thanks, Helen. So we've got one on if we're so confident in our milestone payments, why is the share price and the market cap so low? Remember, those milestone payments are over the life of the deal. There's 26.5 million coming during development and a further 130+ million coming during commercialization at various set threshold points of sales. So that's the total value of the deal plus royalties. I'll reiterate that. Why is the share price so low? Well, it's a funny market we're in, and that's really not for us to comment on. Our job is to develop compelling data sets, good propositions and good drugs, and license them out for very substantial amounts of cash. And that's what we're about. And the market will eventually decide what that's worth. And we sincerely hope so. Another one, back onto inside, outside and insider dealing. Do we ever expect to be outside? Well, yes, is the answer to that. But timings are always delicate, and the windows are quite short and narrow. Quite often in a biotech company, a small biotech company with one major technology. So yes, we do expect to be outside. We can't tell you when. That would be the wrong sort of information to give. But currently we don't believe, and our advice is that we can't buy. We've got a comment on our largest shareholder. Well, that's a matter for that shareholder, I think. We meet with them just like we meet with all our large and institutional shareholders. We know that our large shareholder has been buying in the market, actually up to his particular level at the moment. And everything else is a matter for individual shareholders, but he's firmly holding. Okay. How long have AXA and Octopus been shareholders? First part of this question. I think AXA,
AXA, I think since the IPO back in 2015, or 2016, I wasn't here at the time. Either 2015 or 2016, I can't recall. Octopus came in the funding round that we did in 2020, in March 2020.
So they've been with us a while and staying in, of course.
Sorry, March 21. March 21, thank you.
Yeah. And there were a few other new shareholders. We're very grateful for them, new large shareholders who came in at the same time.
Yeah.
So one long term, one came in at the last round. They tend to hold positions for quite a long time as a general rule.
Yeah, I mean, they come into a company like us because they see it as long-term investment. It's not something they want to trade in and out of.
Question here about Stalicla. There's a backup slide at the end of the deck, which will be published, that gives you a bit more detail about our new partner. Have a look. They are well funded. They've funded one clinical trial in the other group of autism subjects that would not respond to SFX01, and that's turned out to be positive and reported this year. And if you look at their board of directors and investor representatives, you'll see that they are supported by some very deep-pocketed investors. We did that financial due diligence as part of our DD on them in return for them doing technical DD on us. So we're confident in that company and its technology and the quality of its management and board. Otherwise, we wouldn't have concluded the transaction. So unless there are any more questions, there's one here about would we consider Big Pharma taking a position in us? Well, again, that's for them, not for us. We wouldn't deliberately chase it, but if a pharma company wanted to take a position as a shareholder and have experience of that in previous companies, that's a matter, for them. But it's not something that's a high priority for us now. The priorities for us now are to service the deal with Stalicla, to do our part of the bargain in order to secure those milestones, and we're confident of that, to deliver our healthy volunteer study and get that really fine insight into how SFX01 is really working in volunteers before moving it onwards to patients. And then to support the Erasmus University in Rotterdam to deliver a really elegant drug in tumor, drug interacting with molecules in the tumor type of study for us starting next year. I think to our colleagues at Investor, that just about wraps up the questions that have come in. So we'll close it at that point.
Indeed, and thanks to each of you for that. I think you've addressed those questions you can from investors, and of course the company will review all questions submitted today and will publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. Before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company, could I please ask you, Hugh, just for a few closing comments?
So an exciting week for us, the most exciting week for EVGEN, I think, for a very, very long time. And that's the culmination of a great deal of intellectual work and a great deal of good commercial thinking and negotiation. We are confident in our deal. We're confident in being able to do more with this company. And we thank everybody for buying and hopefully staying in there with us for this journey. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hugh, Richard, Helen, thank you for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you will now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that management better understand your views and expectation. This will only take a few minutes to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of EVGEN Pharma PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. Good afternoon to you all.